very much. Thank you, Brian. It was a very interesting talk. And I'm particularly looking forward to Paul Boylan's talk to follow mine, because for me, what I want to talk about is the user. And all the time we talk about all this various methods, and it gets very confusing. I think the vocabulary we use is confusing to both our clients, to the user, and even to our fellow professionals. But if you're going to talk about energy, I suppose I have over time, as an engineer, thought about energy efficiency as being the driver. And I think as I've got older, I've become more client and user focused. Maybe some people say because I've had to. But it's really for me about the function of the space and the business impact of our design. And less so about energy efficiency. I think that is really much, we've seen it today, it's really much a given. So for me, I have a little bit of audience participation, just to wake you up this morning. Hopefully the coffee did that, but I'm going to try and do it with you now. So what is energy? You're here, you're sitting, you want to hear me talk about energy. I want to hear you and how you feel about energy, and what does it mean to you as a metric, as something that you can feel, measure, touch. And what value do you put on that? So I'm going to ask for a show of hands. In the audience, if you put your hand up if you know the cost of a litre of petrol to within 5 cents. Never ask a question that you don't know the answer to. I expected to see all those hands. The cost of your car insurance to within €50 a year. Fantastic amount of hands. Cost of if you're lucky enough to have a golf gym membership, but only those of you that have a golf gym membership need to show your hands, but within €50 a year. Interesting, kind of dropping off a little bit there. Now, I'm going to ask you to answer honestly the next 2 questions. Your yearly cost, not your monthly cost, your yearly cost, don't do multiply by 12, cost of your gas within €100. Not a big number. Your yearly cost of electricity within €100. Slightly bigger number, but interesting to see, in percentage terms, €100 is about 5% of a variance on the average cost. And yet 5 cents on a litre of petrol is a much smaller percentage. So it's not uncommon, and I've asked this question before, that we have a connection to things like car insurance, the cost of petrol. But for some reason, when we look at something over a year, we don't have that connection. And I think it's an evil plan by the likes of ESB and Bord Gáis and Electricity. And I've asked SEAI to seriously consider this, that on your monthly electricity and gas bill, there's a rolling number on your bill that tells you your monthly spend. The utilities aren't keen on that, but I'm actually keen that the utilities do that, because there is about €180, €200 a year saving if you shop around. If you're efficient, if you look at the way in which you use energy in your house, there is the region of maybe €200, €250 a year if you're more efficient and you deal with it properly. The answer to those questions for an average family of 4, which I have, is about €1,800 a year for all those together. It's a big number, and it's a number that in many cases people who were involved in low energy go, oh, and I go, oh, that they go, oh. But for me, I think it's interesting, and we should talk more about metrics and numbers, not only amongst ourselves, but with our clients. What is a kilowatt hour? A 3 kilowatt kettle going for 20 minutes, which is a long time to have a kettle going, is 1 kilowatt hour. A full bath is about 5 kilowatt hours. A litre of petrol is about 10 kilowatt hours of equivalent energy. If you think about it, €1.60, it's about 16 cents a kilowatt hour, not dissimilar to what you pay for your electricity. Humans are interesting, and this is where I'm going to appeal to you as humans. We eat about 2,500 calories a day. 2,500 calories of food is about 3 kilowatts of energy. We're not so efficient. We are CHP units. We actually convert at about 33% efficiency. So in fact, you stuff yourself, as I often do, as you can see, you generate about 1 kilowatt hour of energy in a day. So if I can appeal to the Irish psyche here and say a servant, if you're looking to have one, I don't. Well, my wife might disagree with me on this one, but if you feed them and house them and get them to work bloody hard, you'll get 1 kilowatt hour out of them in a day. So if I can just plant servant, kilowatt hour, just think about it. Our population, our total energy. I've had to do some very funny number maneuvering because, again, it's very complex to try and get these numbers to work. I'm not saying I'm absolutely 100% right. We consume as a country about 154 trillion kilowatt hours of equivalent energy a year. That's within a hair's breadth of 100 kilowatt hours per person per day. And I've just got a nice picture there of 100 Victorian servants. And for me, that's quite striking. And it really reflects for me how cheap energy is. You know, you're buying equivalent 1 kilowatt hour for about 15 cents. You're essentially buying a servant for 15 cents for a day. When we actually take that 100 kilowatt hours, and I've only made it 100 because I'm not good at maths, and we look at the way in which it spends, Ireland, interestingly enough, has a very, very high transport spend, and that is to do with freight, goods, aviation, and the like. But when we look at commercial, it's about 12 kilowatt hours per person per day is what we spend in commercial, offices, industrial. In residential, it's about twice that. But it's actually a bit worse than that because we have 4.6 million population, 1.8 million working population. It's about 31 kilowatt hours per person per day. So I'm just trying to keep you in the kilowatt hour mode. So keep thinking about that 1 kilowatt hour being a servant. Keep thinking about it as being the equivalent output from your food in the day. And for me, when I multiply that up, again, very roughly, it's somewhere in the region of 1.7 billion euros a year spent on lighting and heating and cooling and all that kind of good stuff. Right, I've just planted the kilowatt hour per day into your head, and the commercial spaces in Ireland average around 30 kilowatt hours per person per day. Now, you're going to say, it's a bit mean now because he's talking about kilowatt hours per person per day, and I think in commercial, this is the metric we should talk about. When we talk about commercial, we often talk about kilowatt hours per square metre per day, but that doesn't really face up to the fact that some buildings are highly inefficient in the way they use space. So do you have one person per 10 square metres, one person per 15 square metres? We're doing a really interesting low energy, super ultra sustainable competition in Tenerife at the moment with a Spanish architect, and it's all pretty wacky, crazy stuff, and we're having great fun. But we actually asked the client, was it right that their headquarters building had one person per 25 square metres? And they were a bit offended, but we had to ask the question because we wanted to get kicked off the competition. Because really the brief was wrong, in my view, and is wrong, because when you talk about efficiency, you have to be efficient across everything. And if you're looking at a headquarters building with 25 square metres per person, straight away you're starting off chasing the wrong thing. So it's not about kilowatt hours per square metre per day, it's kilowatt hours per person, because that's what you're going to pay for. We have a track record in this. In fact, in my early time in the UK, I've spent 25 odd years designing low energy buildings, some of which have been very successful, some of which have been a disaster. And I'm going to feed in the disaster part, if you don't mind. This is a very successful building. It's been year on year voted the favourite building among staff in the RT campus. You know the Aircom headquarters, you would have driven past it or walked past it as you came here today. Beautiful building. And a beautiful building to work in, and this is a thread I want to bring in. Cork County Hall is interesting for me because it's a retrofit of a 1970s office block. Natural ventilation, controlled facade. It's got some great features in terms of retrofit, and I think we're going to see some pretty mega retrofit in the next 5 to 10 years. Again, on an international level, Commerce Bank, the tallest natural ventilated office building in Europe. GSW Berlin, 22-story high natural ventilation. Now, I've put the number 70% in there, and I'm going to bring in the first lesson I have learned through all the years. Never lose control. If you're going to talk about comfort criteria, temperature, percentage of occupants being unhappy, and all that kind of stuff, you must have control. So I will never advocate a fully 100% naturally ventilated building, ever, in my career. I think you target a significant natural ventilation approach, but you must have a stopgap. You must have some control. It's not a sin to have a little chiller stuck in the corner, which only operates for 4 or 5 hours in a year, because occupant satisfaction is critical if you're going to move into this area. Incidentally, in our building, we basically run the chiller for maybe anywhere between 4 to 10 hours in the entire year cycle. It's a small chiller. Interesting that the ARB Dublin office worked with Merit Buchholz on this project, which is the Finnish Environmental Institute headquarters building in Helsinki, which is really neat. It's a fantastic project. And again, you see employees levels at about 14 square meters per employee. And we drove the energy down to 38 kilowatt hours per square meter per year, which is pretty mega. And we did that by upsizing the services. Large ducts, all timber frame structure, large ducts, large pipes, and really driving down the running elements of the systems that we were using within the building. Zonal control, sensors on people, all this fantastic amount of control systems to literally just deal with the people that are in the building, when they're in the building, and where they are in the building. There was mention earlier on this morning that you only do natural ventilation for end users. You could argue that Liberty Hall, which we're currently in a cycle at the moment, is funny enough not an end user. It's about 14,000 square metres of office development. It's about 4,500 square metres for SIP2 and about 9,500 square metres for the speculative market. And it's designed predominantly as a naturally ventilated mixed mode tower. It has some really interesting design features, not least of which you can go in and retrofit air conditioning in the way it's designed, in the floor-to-floors, in the zones and the build-ups, in the way in which the air systems are working. And for me, we will see more and more natural vent moving into speculative design, and it'll become more mainstream. I'm just going to give you a really quick case study. In fact, where I want to get to with this is to talk to you about energy cost, but then bring you on to productivity and talk to you about the user's experience. Am I okay, Thomas? This is our office in Ringsend. Very interesting office in that at the time that we actually started on this project, we were working for a builder developer, and it was a speculative office. And at the same time, we were looking for office space because if you remember the boom times, we were kind of going, and we were in 8 places. We weren't really designing as well as we should and could. And we were looking for about 3,500 square meters of office space to house about 350 people. And it just so happened that this had 3,500 square meters of office space, and we said to the developer, could we buy it off them? And it was really interesting because we suddenly had a bill for a speculative office that we wanted to put a green building into. So we were spending our own money, and we actually, in Shell and Core, we actually spent marginally less than the speculative office budget on what I call a very successful green building. So a message I'd say is that green buildings don't necessarily cost more if you design them well. So it was a previous spec office. And I don't want to go into too much detail on this, I just want to talk maybe more about what came out the back end of it, and that is that we've exposed structure, thermal mass, we've got zonal control lighting, we've got acoustic features built into it, we've got high-level ventilation systems, we've got nighttime purging, we've got a high degree of glass. And really for us, a lot of those criteria were key to occupancy satisfaction and productivity. A lot of study has been done, and a lot of study we've done on this area. It's a very bad cross-section. We have a triple skin, or some people call it double skin facade, with interstitial blinds. We're keeping solar radiation input to about 25 watts per square meter, which is really low compared to what the speculative office would have had. We've got a nat vent system predominantly. We've got nighttime purging, so we're basically taking the heat that's building up during the day out at nighttime through top-level vents. We do have a floor air system. We can chill it, and we can heat it, if required. Great user control, and this is really positive, that in the individual windows, users can actually open and close their vents, so they can actually get access to natural ventilation, to natural air. We can, in good 1984 control, we can take control of the vents and we can shut them again, and then they open them and we shut them again, and we open them and shut them again. Because what we're trying to do is balance, and that's a thing in robocall as well, is actually you do want to have some control at a bigger level. The opening vents are great. At high level, they actually work very well. We've no draft issues, particularly with people on the edge. The blinds are outside double glazing. They're really efficient in terms of re-radiating solar. It's a marginally ventilated vent. And a very pleasant office. When we monitor usage and everything else, we're actually seeing now, as we're controlling heat and we're controlling the lower energy elements, that we're actually seeing IT as a significant component of our energy use. But we see a couple of things with our monitoring. We can see our security guard walking through the office at about 8:30, 9 o'clock at night. We've actually seen through this that we're actually leaving far too many computers on at night. So we have software now, and I'm sure you're all aware of this, Night Watchman software, which literally shuts all the computers down and saves what was on the screen or on the system. And that's had a significant improvement in our energy uses. But actually, again, I mentioned this morning, what you can't measure, you can't manage. So I think the value of this data is very, very useful. You can react to it. Okay, if I can just remember, on average, Ireland in commercial is operating at about 31 kilowatt hours per person per day. And that's equivalent to the CIBC air-conditioned prestige old building figure, which is kind of interesting, which is about 33. So what we know from our commercial spend in Ireland is that our buildings are actually operating at that high-end, highly inefficient level. And I think we all pretty much know that ourselves. Building we're operating in at the moment is currently running at about 12 kilowatt hours per person per day. So it's about 60% saving. So what's the big deal? Well, for me, and I think we have to personalize it all the time because I'm an end user of the building, that's nearly 700 euros per year. My structures membership is about 400 euros a year. My IEI membership is about 250. Interesting, now that we have energy so low, below 300 euros per person, our cleaning, reception, and our security is 390. So it's quite interesting to see that other areas begin to pop up, like the kids' toy. Well, that's not bad. And I think the talk I gave that Derek was at, I stopped at this point, but because I was here today, I said to myself, well, is there more? And I think there is more. And I think this is even beginning to influence the way I'm thinking. Well, that's about 150,000 to our bottom line with 210 people in our Dublin office. It's a big number, particularly today, particularly in this environment. And what's interesting, I just had a quick word with Paul there beforehand, is that people are now beginning to look at these numbers, the component parts of whether you're below the line or above the line in profit or loss. And that for us is about 0.5% impact on our profit line or our loss line. So people are watching points of percentages. But what about productivity? I often use this slide when I'm talking to clients about low energy buildings and how fantastic they are and why they should go with it, and they're beautiful and you're going to love it and you're going to be great. And this is a lovely chart that I often use. It talks about people's, I suppose, acceptance of temperature variation in a building that is freely engaged with nature. And for me, this really kind of rings out for me. I think the free engagement with nature, that the ability to open the windows to be able to look out, drove me to talk about comfort criteria and temperature variation. Well, in fact, I think what I was missing was not about the temperature variation, but about the engagement with nature. And I thought it was about that comfort criteria, the energy and the efficiency and the temperature and everything else. But again, when you're chasing energy in a building, and let's say your building is full of 500 very expensive solicitors and lawyers, all on X hundred, 1,000 a year, and you turn down the thermostat and freeze the daylights out of them. You know, what are you doing? I mean, you're saving on energy, but you're having a direct impact on a very valuable commodity, being somebody who generates income. So we've got to be careful sometimes when we actually tackle energy and actually have a direct impact on the end user, annoy them, make them less productive, make them want to go home early. You know, there's a lot of psychology in the way in which we're actually working. So I'm absolutely convinced it's about the user. And many of us in the audience are allergic to users. I know I certainly am at the best of times. But I think we've got to become less allergic to users and actually start thinking about what the user sensation is in our buildings. Our Innovation and Foresight group in London actually have produced this really interesting document called The Living Workplace. And if you just put Arup Living Workplace into Google, you'll actually get a PDF of this. It's a fantastic document. It's really, really great. There's some great data and some great analysis. I don't know why we're giving it to the free world, but that's another story. But it's there. So have a look at it. There's some really interesting data in it in terms of the softer issues that we collectively within our industry are nervous about dealing with. And what we see is that you've seen all these charts. salary costs are massive in comparison to construction costs and all this, that and the other. One piece of data I thought was really interesting is that a 2 to 5% increase in staff productivity pays for the building. That's very small. And certainly we're seeing that these engaged buildings are yielding productivities in the region of 5 to 10%. And this message, I don't think, is getting back to investors and to clients and to end users and to tenants enough, in my view. But it's interesting, the key drivers of comfort and air quality and temperature and views out and all that Brian mentioned, and it was mentioned earlier on about the quality of these spaces, and Brian Moore mentioned it from Hines, are really, really critical in our design. And everybody's going off doing energy performance evaluation, and we do. Our Praise go off, and we've done hundreds of these projects, and we've turned the dial down, and we've get 10, 20, 30% saving, and we're all great, and we get a bit of a fee, and we all go home and think we're great. And that is really, really good, and it's really, really important, and the user control is really important. But for me, the occupant satisfaction evaluation and the feedback of that is really critical. And I'm just going to give you 3 case studies. One, and I'm not giving them a name, but this is the bottom end of the scale. You can see it here, actually. That's -2 in terms of comfort perception. And interesting to see that the comment there is basically from one of the people in the office says, I take every opportunity to be somewhere else. I just don't want to work here. I don't want to be here. I'll work from home before I come to the office. It is dreadful. It is horrible. And you actually see on paper this kind of reaction to a building space. You begin to go up the cycle, obviously to a nicer building. And then you look at a building like this and you're way up there. In fact, this building is about 9.2% increase in perceived productivity. And I know it's that because that's what our office is. And it is our office. So the office is actually, we have a very large data set in UK and Irish buildings, about 490 buildings that we continue to roll forward as we infill this occupancy survey work. And the ARP office is up around the 9.2% perceived productivity. And interestingly enough, the data set follows the Pearson line, which is a link between comfort overall score and perceived productivity. And to think about it, you kind of say, well, 9.2% perceived productivity, what's that actually mean? Well, for me, standing here today, I'm not going to suggest 9% increase in productivity. I would suggest maybe 1.2% increase in productivity. For us, that's potentially nearly $250,000 to $500,000 to our bottom line. And I suppose the reason why I wanted to put 2 figures here was just to bring, I suppose, me nearly as much as anything on a journey of it's not just about energy efficiency, it's actually about what that means to the end user. It's if the end user is more productive. This isn't about giving free coffee to people in the office to get them to work harder and crash at the weekend. It's not about Google offering free meals. That's not what it's about. We're not trying to sweat the asset. We're trying to make the asset happier. We're trying to make the asset want to come to work. We're trying to get the asset to stay at work. And for me, the real underlying trends here are sick days and churn rates. So if you look at a business, we often do this when we come to a new client, we look at their sick day rates and the churn rates, because that's a real area where you can begin to see how a building is actually performing. It's not surprising. If you're not happy, you tend to call in sick on a Monday. If you're not happy, you tend to leave. And the cost of churn in business is enormous. Thank you very much for your time.